Okay, looks like that's up and running. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here on a short week. The short weeks sometimes feel like really long weeks, right? And I know there's a lot going on, like Beth was saying, and Becca, you were sharing, and Annie, you kind of feel like there's a lot discombobulated. And Haley, we haven't even had a time to check in. I don't know how you're doing. Angela, welcome. Yeah, so just really appreciative of our time together. And we do have quite a few things on our agenda today. And so we want to kind of pick up where we left off in our last conversation and be really thoughtful, especially about our upcoming meeting on the 28th and what kind of feedback and what kind of plan we're going to be sharing with the team. So that's kind of the hopes for our time together. But before that, we're going to start off with just our quick introductions and a warm welcome. So if we could just go around and share our name, our pronouns, our role in our organization. And today's check-in is, if you could be a punctuation mark, what would you be? So think about all those punctuation marks. And I have an affinity for this one. I was a language arts teacher, so I had to create a whole list of all the different kinds of punctuation out there. And one that's maybe resonating for you right now in this moment, or in your life, whatever feels right. And I can go ahead and get us started, and then we'll just popcorn and invite someone else to share. And then just know you always have the opportunity to pass. That's totally okay also. So Vanessa Martinez, SEL specialist with ODE. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am a real fan of the ellipses. So those three little dots at the very end, because I feel like I'm a work in progress. And I'm just someone that likes to ruminate and to really think about things a lot. And I'm kind of a slow processor. So I don't like the finality of a period at the very end, because I always feel like you can learn and grow and think some more. So I like the ellipses today. And I'm going to invite, how about Haley?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Haley. I use she, her pronouns. I am a student, a education policy student at the University of Oregon, and I've done quite a bit of work in the mental health space and with health policy and different work or nonprofits focusing on school-based health centers. So I'm here first as a student to learn, all about the amazing work that you guys are doing, but also to provide a student's perspective. And I specifically am excited to be working with the engagement work group because I care a lot about getting marginalized student voices and really challenging myself to learn how to do that so I can use that in my future career. If I were to be, what was the question? I'm sorry.
A punctuation mark.
Oh, yes, a punctuation mark. I would be a question mark for sure. Definitely at this stage in my life, it's just questions constantly and a lot of curiosity. So I think that sums me up pretty well. Annie, do you want to go?
Sure. My name's Annie. I'm a school social worker, or part of the Oregon School Social Work Association, and my title is behavior interventionist, but I'm a school social worker at Lot Whitcomb Elementary School in North Clackamas. I don't know what I would be. Maybe I'd be a colon, because there's a lot of things that come after that. I don't really know. Great. Angela?
Hello, my name is Angela Halo. I am one of the social emotional learning specialists at Lane ESD. And my immediate thought when I saw the prompt was I am a semicolon for two reasons. One, when I taught fifth grade, that was my favorite type of punctuation to teach, just I know it was fun to explain it, but I also think in my role at the ESD, it's all about connections and finding ways to bring things together. And I kind of feel like that's what the semicolon does. So, and I will pick Rebecca.
All right, thanks. I am Rebecca Pierce, and you can call me Becca, that's fine too. I just see Rebecca on all my formal stuff, but it's one of those things in my family, my grandmother, when I was in trouble, I probably got called Rebecca. So you can call me Becca. The more I get to know people, that's what I prefer. She, her pronouns. And I am a high school school counselor down in Southern Oregon, Klamath Falls. And there's three main high schools in our area, and I'm at the most, I'd say, central high school, where we pull from probably the most diverse amount of populations, both really, really wealthy kids, but also kids who are in lots of other different situations too, and lots of different cultural backgrounds. And I'm really proud of that. We love that a lot. And I think that makes us a really unique school in that way. So it's really great. Okay, this is a good question. I really liked it. I really liked what you were saying, Vanessa, about the ellipses, because I think I tend to use ellipses a lot. I probably overuse them, actually. It's probably annoying for some people. But I can relate to that, I think, a little bit, the way you said that about, I also am a processor. I have to think about things and process things. And I tend to think pretty quickly, but at the same time, when it's something really important, I need to definitely process things. And sometimes I don't always come up with my first statement on the first time around. My most important statement, I may need some time to think about it. But then I was also thinking, I sort of like the idea of a semicolon also, because of the concept of, the definition of a semicolon connecting two independent phrases. The idea of being able to connect different groups that are independent of each other or even opposed to each other, I think is a pretty cool thing. I tended to do that for some reason when I was in grad school. We worked very separately with the clinical mental health people and then school counselors, and we were sort of two separate groups, but we'd end up working together a lot. And I found that I would find myself, I guess, as a bridge in between the two groups a lot, because they were very different. Even though we're all doing mental health work and social emotional learning, I found that the two worlds were very different. So I really liked that a lot. I think I take pride in that too. So.
Cool. And I will bring us home. So hello, everyone. Beth Wiggum. I have been the one doing a lot of communication and have now passed that on to Vanessa. So super happy that we're partnering in that work. So my position supports school counseling programs, which are required in every district and every school around the state. And then also career and college readiness is my other big bucket of work. So I support both of those areas of work. I go by she, her for my pronouns. And so I've mentioned before, so if under the escape, you see the little squiggly, I don't know what the name of the squiggly punctuation is, but I just love it. I use it when I add my name to things instead of like a line, or it just is like going with the flow. And I feel like with this work and my work, I have to go with the flow sometimes. There's not always a straight line to get to where we want to go. So I'm just seeing where it goes. And part of the process is like seeing what happens. So, yep. So just here with you all and enjoying the journey that we have together, part of the process. And it looks like I'm up next on the agenda. Is that okay, Vanessa? We just wanted to revisit just really briefly the norms that are up at the top of the agenda. And we've set that together in previous meetings. Our first couple of meetings developed, refined those, and just wanted to ground us in that as we move forward today. So if you want to just take a moment, just refresh your memory, maybe find one you want to hold close for our meeting, and then we'll move on.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, everybody. So our next charge is to look at our roles and responsibilities. And I know Angela and Annie were both said that they would be willing to do note taking. So just want to check in if that's still okay with you all today. Okay. I'm seeing some hand
Can I clarify? Sorry, there's two places where it says February 22nd. Do you want to, are those duplicated? It's down on page 5, and also it looks like on page 1.
Yes. So don't worry about the one at the bottom. I just
Okay.
cut and pasted it and moved it up at the top because I needed to work on it, but I didn't want to move it because you all probably needed to be grounded in the work. So yeah, don't do the one at the bottom. Thanks for asking. And then we were hoping, just because we do have quite a bit that we need to get to today and some big decisions that need to be made, and really thinking about how we're going to show up at our meeting and what our plan is around that. We would love to have a timekeeper that can kind of keep us on track and just kind of name that, hey, this is, we're at time for this section. Can we check in about it? So who would be willing to do that? And you can find the times on the left-hand side that kind of will ground us into where we need to be.
I'm happy to do that as well. I think I can figure that out.
Okay. If that's all right, Angela, yeah, that'd be great. Sometimes it's hard when you're trying to facilitate something, you kind of lose sight because you're deeply immersed in it. And maybe that's something we can just all attend to too. That would be awesome.
We're already 5 minutes over of our
I
section.
know.
I just did my job.
Right. Thank you. All right. And those were kind of the two big ones. Hi, Todd. Welcome. Good to see you. Happy
Hi.
Tuesday.
Two.
All right. And then I'll have Beth just lead us into our intention for our time today. And Todd, I'm going to post it in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Vanessa. So just for intentions, so for this group, what we want to do is we want to develop and finalize an engagement plan. So that's what we're really going to try to focus in on and having that ready to go, because you all will be presenting that to the advisory group on the 28th, which is going to be next Monday. So we're going to want their input on what the plan is and then lock in that plan, because that work for engagement is going to happen throughout March. So we know we're on a really quick turnaround and deadline for that. So we also have an opportunity to get the framework and standards input and see maybe where there might be questions that could be or concepts or thinking around what's being asked during engagement. And so we want to hear from them on that as well. So just really excited to see what we develop today. And then I'll pass it back over to Vanessa.
Yeah, so just to kind of ground us as to where we were, part of the challenge of being, and the opportunity, right, of being meeting like this twice is that we don't necessarily always have the same folks in both meetings. So we kind of lose track of, some of the work that maybe has come on, and yet we also can contribute with fresh eyes and fresh perspectives. So just to kind of ground us, we did look at some potential questions, and we looked at this idea of like a thorn and a rose, right? And just to kind of share, we did bring that up into our internal group meeting spaces with other folks at ODE. And some folks had some really good questions, and they just were wondering if perhaps we might be leading different groups into what we envision we would hope to see in a framework and standards. So I thought that was really helpful and important feedback, because right now, our charge is to really see what do families, what do learners, what do communities, what are they seeing that's important to see in the standards and also include in the framework. And I feel like, and that was partially my bad. Like I was like, oh, okay, let's ground ourselves in something, right? But the trouble is that when you do that, then you lose the openness of what it is you're trying to really capture, which I think is where we're at right now. So what has come up from there is a different set of questions that I would like us to look at. And that doesn't mean that we're not doing the other one and that there's not place for the other questions to live. And maybe we use that protocol later once we have something that we want to share with everybody and to get thoughts about what you like about it, what you don't. It might lend itself down the line, but we just thought it might be an important thing to consider, like being much more open at first, especially as we're casting wide. And, Beth and I do sit in with the the standards and framework group. So being very conscientious about what do they need? What information do they need that's going to help them be responsive to what the data is going to show us? So questions about that before we take a look at the examples themselves. Does that make sense? Is that resonating with you or connecting?
It is, Vanessa. My only wrestle with is if it's not framed well, it's just people talking about stuff that may or may not have anything to do with what we actually have control over. And so that's my only, I agree, leading isn't what we want, but I think we have to be clear what we're talking about. So I think maybe that's the dance, and I'm okay with that. And I think it's good to call it out. Where we can be thoughtful about an open question about this concept rather than any concept, I think is maybe what I'm thinking about. So it's not, stymied in, I have no idea what to say because it's so open, and that there's a danger in not having it framed or focused well. So I think that's a dance, attention. I agree.
And I'll just, as I was thinking about this and thinking about it with others, it did kind of make it a bit easier in some ways. It just made it, I think it'll be harder on the receiving end with what do we do with all this data, because it is open-ended and it's going to be harder to categorize and potentially find themes. But in terms of gathering the input, I think it will lend itself to, I think, a greater ease at this point. And like Todd, like you were saying, that framing is going to be super, super important to make sense of what is it that we're asking for and how does it fit in?
Yeah, I guess that's maybe my question about what do the frameworks and standards groups need from community members? So do they need to know, like, it's really important that my child learns about related to SEL, or like, what things are they needing to be able to, or I really want my district to be, I don't know. Like, what are those things that they've said that they need from the community?
Right. So this is what we've tried to capture, and I don't know if you all are on that document yet, but it's the draft 2, option 2. If you look at the bottom, it's really 2 questions, and one around the standards and the other one is around the
I didn't
framework.
see that. I was still just looking down at the bottom, and
There's so many things, Annie, so many things.
Vanessa, can I clarify real quick something?
Yeah.
Are you saying that this, excuse me, this document, the draft 2, option 2, are you saying that that's some stuff that came out of some of the internal group meetings? Is that what you're saying?
So no, this came out on Friday when we met with, her name's Kristen McLean, someone that helps us with basically the bill management. And she had some concerns about how leading we were with our questions. And that right now, because it's input, right, we want to leave it as open-ended as possible. So that's what shifted our thinking.
Yeah.
And also specific to our charge and the bill, and thinking about what these teams really need. We need to start from a place of broadness.
I really like something that Kristen told us. Kristen said, is it in scope or out of scope of what the bill is asking us to do? And just staying really clear and aligned to the bill as much as we can. And then just kind of judging like, okay, is this question going to take us out of the scope of asking that versus like, what can we get to help us answer like what we need for addressing the bill?
Well, and I think that goes back to the thing that, oh gosh, our other group member who's not here today, I can't think of her name right this minute, I apologize. She had said we need to really make sure to narrow down what our purpose is. And I agree with that as well. And so we obviously know that our purpose is, we're looking at how do we, what kind of engagement do we need to get? We know that's our purpose, but I feel like that wasn't really the question. The question was, Okay, and so then what next? You know, what's our main purpose, and what's the scope? You know, does this take us in or out of the scope? That's a good question. I like that. I feel like that leads us to trying to narrow down what our actual purpose is in this particular group besides fostering engagement. How do we get there?
So what do you think about these two questions? So the first one says, and it's really tricky because we can't really be leading and defining SEL, because that's what we're trying to figure out, right? Is what is important to families so that they can, and learners and communities, what can they tell us about
Can
their
we-
experience?
Can we say, instead of saying beyond the classroom content areas, can we say with regards to social emotional learning? Like, is that something that,
I wonder if we can do that in the framing, like what we'll say, hey, we're working on creating standards and a framework for K-12 Oregon, right? Our K-12 system. I think we may fall into a place where then we have to define what that is. And then we are essentially potentially leading them with what. Do you know what I mean? Like if we start saying, well, it means self-regulation or how to be socially aware of my peer interactions. I think those are the things, we don't want to lead them into that. We want to find out from them what is important to you outside of these content areas. What do you want your student to be able to learn as well?
It seems like this comes back to that other discussion we were having about being really careful about our language. You know, asking these questions more broadly seems like that allows for that better, to not be so jargon, you know, like driven by asking questions like I think it is beyond the class content area. And that's tricky. It almost feels a little bit like when you're doing research on something, you know, you're like, I hope this nets me the, you know, the results I desire. But it may not. You know, when you're doing research, there's always that risk of like, I might do this research and it might be the opposite of what I'm wanting. So like, I think that it's always the risk, but I think you have to take that risk. It's not true research unless you're ready to accept the, you know, other answer as well, or to hear the other answer. And so the conversation about beyond class content area instead of social emotional learning, that's tough. I don't know if I'm thinking of that correctly, but it feels like that does help us get away, because these are questions we would ask our stakeholders. Is that correct? Or is that kind of the idea?
Yeah.
Parents or teachers or whoever, caregivers.
So, because we have courses that incorporate SEL standards already. So I'm wondering about even just the frame of, you know, not a regular course, because every district might have different stuff that they offer, but maybe is it too leading to say outside of what we know as traditional content courses like language arts, mathematics, and science, outside of those core content areas, what things should your kids be learning to know and be able to do to be success in life?
Todd, are you saying that there are schools like your guys' school, maybe schools that have social emotional learning built in? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so we have second steps that is pretty rigorous at our elementaries all the way through middle school. And then we have specific other programs that we have for our secondaries that bake in a lot of the SEL stuff, because we needed to go there because our kids were really struggling. So,
well, and I guess to jump in on top of that, or to jump on top of what you're saying, we have nothing. I would beg to say that in our schools, in our district, we have folks who do some of that work, but we don't have it being, I don't think, driven into especially not at the middle and high school level.
mm-hmm.
In fact, I just had a lesson that I created, a school counseling lesson last week, 2 weeks ago, and it faced tremendous backlash because it had the feelings words in it. Shameful. It was quite comical. I was like, oh, boy.
Sorry.
Yeah. But the point is that, yeah, we're battling that, especially at the high school level.
two wonderings when you say that, then I wonder if one of the questions is about value, like what do you value about social emotional learning, or like what things do you, what just happened to the There we go. What do you value about that? What's important to you? And then I guess I really do feel like we need to name, because we're at such different places with regards to like what different districts are doing. I feel like we really need to name social emotional learning, because I think anyone could say like what is beyond class content areas doesn't feel super, like that doesn't really feel like what the bill's asking for, right? Like the bill's asking for social emotional learning framework across the state. And so I think we just need to name that. And I don't think we need to define it, because I think that's what we're asking for. Like, I think if we're saying, what do you know that to be? It will be interesting to see what people in your high school say versus what people are not, right? So I guess those would be my two. Like, yeah.
Andy, you're articulating what I was trying to say earlier. If we don't name what it is, it's just a whatever. I mean, we think about SEL skills. My colleagues that are in the business community, they call those the soft skills. And they're really trying to get us to make sure our kids all have these soft skills when we talk about, but these are like success and life skills. Like, yeah, we want those. I'm like, okay.
Right, but if we say success and life skills, like that doesn't really match the bill, what the bill says, right? The bill's
Mean the
pretty,
same thing.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we just use some of the specific explicit language that the bill uses without getting too jargony? I'm wondering if there's a way for us to not use the word social emotional learning, because that could be difficult for some people to hear that. But we don't also skirt around it by saying beyond class is there a middle ground is what I'm wondering. Is there something in the middle that we might name?
Why would we not use the term social emotional learning?
I don't think everybody knows what it is, to be very frank about that. I don't know that everybody understands what social emotional learning is. And maybe also there might even be very negative feelings towards the word. Like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. Absolutely not. I'm just speaking from what we're hearing in our area and what we hear from folks, and we're in rural Southern Oregon. So, but I think there's definitely work that can be done. It's just, I think people need to have a clear understanding. Like there needs to be some sort of pre-teaching, I guess, or there's work that needs to be done around how do we help folks really understand what it really is instead of just using the word.
I absolutely agree. I just think on the survey, though, I think providing a definition, I'm going back to what Annie said, like that's what the bill says is social emotional learning. And I think we can't keep not using that term when we are getting standards or getting a framework at the state level. And so I think it's just better it's social emotional learning. And here's the here's a definition we're using in Oregon, and tell us about what you want around that. And if you don't like it, if you don't like the term, that's fine. That will come out in that. But I think the longer we push off saying social emotional learning, and this is how we look at it in Oregon, we're just opening it up to people misunderstanding it. And yes, absolutely agree. There's a lot of teaching that needs to happen, but in this particular survey, my thought is I think it needs to be called out social emotional learning.
Do you all think that the advisory group could get to a common definition before the survey, before the engagement happens? It's like if we were going to name it for them, do you think the advisory group could come around that common definition?
What does the bill, can we just look at and see if there's already a definition in the bill?
Let me grab that real quick.
That is something that the standards group has surfaced, that they were curious about defining that together. And they were going to share at the on the 28th meeting if that was something that should be pursued.
Is that a question we ask people in this survey? What do you understand SEL, like not SEL, but what do you understand social emotional learning to be?
That would be interesting.
I think it's really kind of important to Rebecca's point. I mean, I'm also the equity lead for our district. And so we were receiving some hate mail from, I'll just not to get political, but I think it was pretty far right.
Yep, it does.
Who just lumped in, if your district's talking about equity work, social emotional learning, they lumped about 5 things in there. They're trying to brainwash your child. I mean, it was just this big thing. Like, are you kidding me? Really? And we're little Southern Oregon, right, Rebecca? I mean, it's like this stuff gets hold and it roots in. I think maybe asking, how do you define this would be really helpful to see what the misperception might be. And that might be something that's just more Southern Oregon, I don't know, or maybe Eastern Oregon, but.
Yeah.
it's
Very,
not-
it's very relevant though.
It's, I think people don't know what it is sometimes, and they
Yes.
lump it into other things that are part of political movements where it shouldn't be, but that's been done, so.
That's it. That's right. And we can't just ignore it and pretend it's not there. You're right, Todd. I agree. Like
Yeah.
it is there whether we like it or not. And we certainly have to attend to every part of Oregon, you know, as best we can.
I think kind of to Angela's point, any opportunity we can get to clearly define what it is and what it isn't is helpful in dispelling these sorts of terrible rumors that are out there and myths.
Though it could be a little bit leading, it is true. You're right. But yeah, it seems like it's so important in that just because of those things. You're right, Todd.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we want to keep social emotional learning in, right? So like actually naming that. So let's play with what that would look like. And I also heard, you know, asking them how they would define that, because I think that would be interesting too. So I don't know if we do it as part of the framing, or do we just leave it open-ended and ask them for their definitions? What do you think? I do think that the transparency of naming it is important.
Just a random thought, because the early childhood, you know, has SEL standards in their document. Do they define it? Can we use what they've already done? I know that's a few years old, but because it's another state-based agency that did all that work, tapping into that.
Sorry, Angela, who did you reference?
The early childhood,
Okay.
they have SEL standards
Right.
embedded in that document that came out like 2018, 2019. I was going to see if I could find it.
That's a good point, yeah, because
'Cause I
that's already
don't-
out there.
I don't see it defined in the bill, except that it says promote self-awareness, awareness of others, critical thinking and understanding regarding the interaction. So, I mean, there is a little bit, but not like a clear definition, I guess. It also talks about promoting the creation of school cultures that support kindness, care, connection. That's in the bill. So that might be language we could literally just take out and put together to put in there, since we're trying to stick to that.
I think that'd be good in the framing of like, here's why we're asking for your opinion. Oregon's passed a bill that has asked for us to create standards around that exact language that you said. And then we could ask like, what do you value? What is important to you in these standards? I guess I don't know if we ask what's not what you wouldn't want to see. I think that's where we might get into some of the right like pushback things. And I think we just ask like, what's important to you?
Well, and I think naturally we're always going to get more engagement, just human nature, I think, by tapping into people's value systems. I mean, by asking like, what is valuable to you? Yeah, and I think you naturally get those questions answered. I mean, I feel like anytime you're trying to bring change, if you can bring in somebody's values and what's valuable, then I think you bring change. I think it's naturally helps to bring some change.
So how do we think about these questions now? This is for the adults, right? So this is not the student-friendly version of them. So we have, what social emotional skills and knowledge should schools focus on and develop? Whoever the anonymous crow is. Thank you. Angela, take it out of there.
It wasn't me.
Annie.
One of us. I went down the rabbit hole trying to find this early childhood document, and I just found
Okay,
it.
perfect.
Sorry.
And then what is important and valuable to you, right? As we keep that in mind.
Can we say with regards to social emotional learning?
Yeah.
But it also talks about environment, right? And school culture. Those are both things, and school culture.
Yeah, I think we'll pull right out of the bill.
Promote the
Okay.
creation of school cultures that support kindness, care, connection, equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is from the bill.
Can you copy and paste that on here somewhere, Angela? Is that possible?
Yeah, I wish my monitor is communicating this.
Oh, I can find it.
No, it's just somebody was telling me how you can do that because I want to copy and paste. I'm on 2 different computers. Where do you want me to put it at? Sorry, I'm on the right document, I think. Oh, here I go.
I feel like that needs to go in the, what did you call it, Vanessa? When, like, the framing of it, is there a part that, is there going to be like a standard, here's what we're saying to every group? I feel like
Right, a
go into
standard
that part.
protocol, which
Yeah.
you can look at also. We have something just started.
Can you put it right here, right, and underneath that standard protocol thing, Angela?
Oh, yeah, oh yeah, okay. Yep, I see that now. Let me copy and paste this.
There's also this one I'm going to put right below that just to see if that's anything that might address standards. Oh, so somebody delete it. The thing that was added.
Beth, was it this one here? Let me see if I can put something in there. Is this one you're talking about? Promote the creation of school cultures?
Yes, yep, that's the other one.
Got it.
Yeah, there was like these 2 parts that the
Oh,
bill.
thank you.
Oh, yeah, they're different. You're right. I thought they were.
Yeah.
That was taking me a long time.
Like
Thank
one
you.
seems more about like the environment, whereas the other one starts to get into
Oh,
like
yeah, you're right.
skills.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah, so I guess my wondering would be, do we address, are both of those things addressed in the questions that we're asking? And do they need to be, like, should they be in one question or should they be in separate questions if we're talking about the top one's really around school culture and the bottom one really feels like it's more about like individual student skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although they go hand in hand, I guess that there's not really, like, when you're actually teaching that, there's not a separation, right? If you're creating a good school culture, you're also creating spaces where kids are promoting. So maybe they don't need to be separated.
In the title standard protocol, I'm just wondering, I'm not tracking on what that means. I'm on day 7 of critical training, and all we've been doing are protocols. So when you say protocol, I'm like, well, what's the protocol? It's got to have steps to it. It's got to have a vision. It's got to.
It wasn't, it was just a placeholder.
Got it.
So I think it would be language that we would say for whatever group we're talking with or engaging with, we would say this language to just ground us in some common language, especially the bill language.
Maybe it's not even in the questions. Maybe it is something that's just like, let's say a survey. Yeah, it's almost like a separate statement. Let's say at the top, like, for the purposes of this survey, blah, 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 please, take into consideration these concepts, or however you want to word that,
Yeah, I like for the purposes of the survey,
survey.
This is language from the bill that we're working through, and we have questions about that. What's
like
important to you?
I like that. So if we are going to move into kind of defining that, do we want to still ask them the question, how do they define social emotional learning?
Good question.
Well, you could ask them to rank it. You could do a Likert scale.
Yeah.
Scale 1 to 5. 1 meaning I totally agree with
important
this.
is
5
this?
meaning this is not what's happening for me.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like Likert scale questions. I think
I know, right?
they break up a survey nicely.
No delete tabs. Please come to the front office.
That's not a bad idea.
That
We
would
can
be
find it.
interesting, right? Like how are you responding to
Mhm.
this?
Just
Like
random
what's coming up for you?
What would be the why if we got that information and it said self-awareness is a 1, I don't care about it at all.
Mm.
What would be the, like, we still have to promote self-awareness as part of the bill. So what would be how would that change what our outcomes would be?
I'm also more curious about seeing how they define it, because like, let's say they rank it a 1 or pretty low. Like, I'm curious, oftentimes when people don't support something like that, it's because they might have a skewed definition of it.
Mhm.
So like maybe the scale in conjunction with their definition, but I'm curious what their thought is behind like their ranking.
That's a great point.
I like that, Haley. You know, you could also, if you're using a Google survey, I think you do Survey Monkey too, you can do logic. And so you could do strongly agree, strongly disagree, and then depending on their answer, it kicks them to a different part to explain. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I strongly disagree with this. What does that mean? So how would you define it, or
How would you
all the things that Haley just said?
Mhm.
You know, I'm sorry, I got kind of down this rabbit hole, the early childhood document. It might be good to kind of look at the SEL piece of this because it does go through kindergarten and the bill is different. I totally get that. But to kind of access or to utilize what this huge group did and took in all that information, they don't have a specific, I can't find a specific definition of SEL, but it's a huge section of this early childhood document. And they do utilize Castle's competencies. But I think just in general, this would be a good document to come back to for this group to make sure there's some kind of cohesion from what already happened with this.
Yeah, and I think again, just a reminder, right now we're just at the input, right? We will have lots of opportunities to reflect back and say, how is this landing? You know, use Likert scales. Right now, we're just gathering general information that's going to help the framework team at least start to think about what are some themes, same as the standards. I want to be conscientious of not leading or saying that there may be other things that we're not even defining right now that is equally important, and we're not potentially giving it value because we're not naming it yet.
I think we should, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, like, I'm in the questions there. So standards, number 1. So free text responses. In the way that's sort of, it's 2 sentences, so it's a complex thing for somebody to respond to. But then you're having to pour through free text responses to get data. So what's your target audience do you think you have on this, Beth or Vanessa? Like 50 people, 50,000 people?
Well, that brings us to the other point, which is, what is our ask? We have the people that we have in our advisory, and that's who we have.
I mean, we have our Southern Oregon connection thing down here. It can go out to 600, 700, 800 emails pretty quickly. And
Mhm.
if they shared it with 2 friends, that number goes up pretty high. That's just Southern Oregon. And we're small.
Yeah.
Well, and how are we getting equitable responses too, as far as like, then is the voice, you know, I don't know. Is the voice only in one area if we're gonna send it out to all those responses, or how do we weigh that?
Does ODE have people that kind of help with how to access and make sure we're like equitable research, you know, surveying? Do you guys have people that you consult with when you send out surveys to make sure we're getting across Oregon? And
Vanessa, you want me to answer?
Yeah, because I'm not super
Yeah.
clear yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have our communications office, and that team helps us to disseminate to different audiences and kind of like think through a plan of like dissemination of getting it out there. We also have internal multiple listservs that we can send it out through, and we just contact that person and say, hey, can you send it out through your listserv? So like Todd keeps mentioning about business and industry, we have our CTE secondary post-secondary team. We can send it through there to get input. We have a mental health internal collaborative that we can send out and ask them to send it out through their listservs. We also have like all the different title programs. We can ask them to send it through their listservs, and so that will get their different partners to engage. We also want to address getting student voice as part of this process, and that's going to be key. And then the other is you all. Part of the ask for you all to be participating in this is could you help with your organization's affiliate groups, reach out to them and ask them to respond as well. But we wanted to like think through with you all about that.
I think too, we talked about like focus groups, right? For some folks, I think that will be, and I forgot who was here last time too, but the person who's from Adelante Mujeres that could translate and do some focus groups. So I guess I'm wondering if that's something that we want to bring to the whole group next time, of like who are the players that we really need to get focus groups from. Who can we send out a survey to? And maybe the survey is more Likert scale around like which of these things is, I don't know, maybe it's different questions, which I know feels like a lot, but do you have the means to look through and create themes if you're getting 1,000 responses, or is that just like, yeah, right? So that probably, if we're doing a Google survey, then we probably need to do not short answers.
Right.
For what regions or what areas or what populations do we really need to get like focus groups from, or surveys, like calling interviews, I mean.
Thanks for saying that, because I think that's the challenge, is that we can get lots of data. But the trouble is, then, I mean, it would literally be Beth and I, and we don't have the capacity to look over hundreds of thousands of surveys and look at themes, right? So what makes the most sense here? Do we want to do more of a focus group type empathy interviews based on the relationships that folks have on the advisory group? Does that make more sense right now? And then cast wide with how is this landing, this framework, or how are these standards feeling? Or do we then we have to move to something more like a Likert scale, something that's more manageable that we can see on a chart, right? But then we lose the open-endedness of it all.
One thought that I had was like having like regional focus groups, not for like one whole region, but maybe a couple in different regions, and having those be more for like depth and going in depth with like the responses and creating themes from those, but then having a survey specifically for students, but like whole community members and stuff. But like, I think the survey is the easiest way to do that, more for breadth, like focus groups for depth and the survey for breadth. And obviously that data we'll have a lot more of, so it'll be easier to work with. But I was wondering if that's a problem, like having like more data that's in the form of surveying than in having more data and having less data that's like from focus groups. Like, do those need to be equal, or can they both be a possibility, but one of them has way more data to work with?
Well, I'll just lean back on my survey courses that I had to take for my silly doctorate, but those, looking at qualitative data is really complex, and there are tools you can use to run algorithms on word choices and frequency and those kinds of things, and you can make some deductions on very complex data fields. But really moving to a forced choice Likert scale kind of a thing gives you your hard and your fast. Like I can get my head around this one, and it's there were 27,000 people that responded. Here's what their data are. the more data you get, usually you're getting to that averages more quickly. It's harder to see the extremes for those concerns. So I don't know. The hard lesson for me was you get what you ask for sometimes, which is really complex. So I do think we need to be thoughtful about what prongs we want to be going down. So if we want to do the more quantifiable data, then that's the Likert scale kind of thing. I just capacity wise right now for me to conduct empathy interviews, I would have to say I'd probably be very limited. If I could get one done, I'd be very surprised. I've been in meetings since 7 o'clock this morning, and I'm going to be here till about 8 o'clock tonight. So that's just my new norm for some reason. I don't know why, but not that I couldn't ask somebody else to do that. That's a possibility.
So Angela reminded us we have probably now 6 minutes left of this time. So I think that's the other pressure, right? We have a time situation. So I think by today, we should be pretty clear about what we are thinking our questions are going to be and which route we want to go. Go ahead, Annie.
Do we know how many schools use the Youth Truth data, like Youth Truth survey? Because that could be a way to not use, I mean, they're already asking these questions. They're already talking about that. I wonder if that's something that we then don't have to do for students, if we can just take, and do we have access to it? I guess is my other wondering. Like, then can we look and say what this is clearly important to students or this isn't, or here's how school makes me feel. And then they have, they're already doing some of that. So then we could focus our time and empathy interviews on more regional and culturally specific folks. Because I hear you, Todd, like if we're being asked to do that labor, I mean, it's just a lot. And it's important, right? I think that that's the other piece is like getting from, if we could do one empathy interview, and that would still be important and valuable for folks who've been marginalized, especially in our communities.
And we could run, here's our quantifiable questions that are Likert scales and true and false and those kinds of things. And we can ask for values on a scale, and then ask, 2 or 3 questions that are just free text and then just let it be what it is. You can do that. It's just, I think what people know is we're not going to be able to quantify how people feel in terms of how they wrote. But that could also be, that all comes back in a spreadsheet if you're using Google, for example, and then you can run how frequency of word choices, and you can have it scan and give you, hey, of the whatever 1,200 people that took our survey, 150 said this, so that seems to be kind of an important theme. Let's talk about that. So you could kind of blend it a little bit. Yeah.
I guess I'm also worried that the people that we really need to hear their voices from aren't going to do a Google survey. Like we're not probably going to hear from, like my families probably aren't going to do that unless we're out there or I'm calling them to say like, hey, will you do this? Hey, will you do this? And that.
You are correct.
Yeah.
And people have had a lot of surveys over the last couple of years. So there's that just kind of probably frustration or burnout. Though it's, I think, our best method. I think we just need to be cognizant that folks are tired too. Had a lot of questions and surveys and emails coming at them.
So it sounds like it could be both. It could be that we do ask these questions in kind of an empathy focus group, whatever makes sense for us on the advisory, however much bandwidth we have, to be at least building those connections and hearing from those that we need to hear from that we know we're not going to get in surveys. So Beth and I met with someone who works with not McKinney-Vento, but who works with houseless youth. I mean, that to me, we're not going to get that student's perspective on a survey. So, and that's something that Beth and I can create that space to ask some of these questions. So I think it sounds like we could do this and maybe or our ask of the group is to take this back and engage as many people as possible. And then also have a survey.
Could
Or
we
are we
do
now saying using the data from Youth Truth?
Well, I guess I don't know the logistics of getting this out to students as far as like, I don't know what that looks like in high school. I just don't work in high school, so I don't know what that looks like. And Youth Truth seems easy and feasible if we can get the data. But I'm wondering too, if we could also do, like, we could do a empathy survey, but I'm wondering if you could also set up a focus group that like we call people to come join, or like pick folks in different regions, and we could, if you could do a focus group, or does that not feel?
Yes, we could totally do that. And Beth and I have been talking about that. So like hosting ODE sessions, listening sessions, where we would say, hey, these are the 2 dates, these are the 3 dates, 4 dates, some in the day, some in the evening, and then create spaces for us to listen in and ask these questions of folks. And then you all could help advertise, help get the word out. And we could do that internally too.
Yeah, Vanessa, I would even say like help facilitate, like if you all would be able to, you're the warm connection to your communities.
I know you.
And we recognize that. So like if there was a way for you all to help ask the questions and we were there to like capture it and look at themes pretty quickly through the discussion, maybe that might be a way to kind of capture it.
Can I offer a thought? I'm Daniel. I'm driving.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm just offering what I can today. I think one possible conduit space that might be helpful in some communities, like I'm thinking, I'm sorry I joined late and I'll probably not be on the whole time, but is reaching out through affinity groups like DSU leaders who we know, GSA leaders we know, Latinx, people who maybe work in juvenile detention, like educational facilities, like networking with trusted adults in systems in our communities, who I think will probably get, if they're good and they're situated, will probably get more vibrant, honest responses through those affinity groups. Just a thought.
I feel like I would definitely have the capacity more to be able to like sort of help with that advertising, that reaching out and talking, like you're saying, Daniel, I like that idea a lot, and saying like, oh yeah, I know the folks who are the teachers up at the juvenile department, or I could certainly, connect with those folks, or the like, our tribal youth leaders. And they're just for some examples, I think that feels doable, and it's still part of those empathy interviews, I suppose, but I feel that feels doable, and they're the ones that would have the best knowledge of how to get those folks connected. Obviously, I don't know how to get them connected, so I'm not in their spaces, but I certainly could reach out to the leaders of those groups if we can set up focus groups to invite them to different times, like listening sessions, like you said.
Mhm. Yeah, same for me. We have our big network down here, so I think we could easily get a couple hundred people at least advertised out to from all these different communities that Daniel articulated so well that are on our network. And I think we could get folks to participate. It wouldn't be all couple hundred of them, but I think we can get a large chunk.
Wonderful. So it sounds like the advisory group or even the engagement group, work group can help be connecting with others in your communities to be able to get them to participate. So my question would be, would you all be able to help identify the different groups we would want to do outreach to and invite, so that we could then figure out gaps that we might need to address groups, and then figure out a plan for how to do that? So kind of like the who should be outreach to, what communities, what groups.
I'm wondering if we want to do that at our bigger group, like if we have kind of different area, like different, if we can kind of categorize different groups of people, right? Like this sounds, I don't know. Anyway, categorize different groups of people, and then who has contacts with them in the larger groups, so that it also doesn't just fall on us. But like if someone has a really good relationship with I'm just gonna say Adelante Mujeres because she was here, right? Then that kind of gets some voice of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx folks. And then like, we do want as much representation as possible. And we want to make sure that we're also hearing from Native youth and we're also hearing from houseless youth. And so how can we prioritize like who has the connection, who has the relationship, like more people to be able to do that, but also that we're not missing folks. Like, can we do it in that broad session next time? And I don't know, I think we talked about this in one of the other groups, I can't remember, but if we could have like, each of us has a 3-star system and we put next to the like groups we really want to make sure we hear voices from.
Mhm.
And then we could fill in like who has connections with those folks and who can do that. And then like make a plan that everyone does a little piece of that work.
I wonder for our next, on the meeting on the 28th, if we have actually something ready to go to give to everyone, like a survey, sort of, not a survey exactly, but a document anyways, to collect that information on, and leave that fairly open-ended. But I'm wondering if that's maybe our way to go, a Google Doc or something, I don't know, Google form. Maybe could that be one of the main focuses of our meeting on the 28th? Not that everybody's like shouting out their answers, but that maybe there's a few minutes given to please go to this document right now and jot down some of your, your connections in the community, along with maybe presenting some of these questions we're talking about, like, hey, here's where we're at.
Yeah.
And
So
here's what we need from you all.
The beauty of the 28th is that most of the time, the bulk of the time is for this group to share out and share the tension points and get feedback. So a large part of that is dedicated to that space. And then the good thing is that we all actually meet that following Monday. I'm sorry, Tuesday, because the big group is on Monday, and then we all meet the following day on Tuesday. So I think that will be good because we'll be able to look through that feedback and make any kind of final adjustments and then kind of go about it. But I think we have to be clear about what is our ask of the group, and then how are we leaning on the strengths of relationships and connections that they already have. And I like the idea of like a Google survey, like who can you tap into, right? That we can share this out with. And then we can also see where the blind spots are, like who's missing, who do we need to, Beth and I, who do we need to look to make sure that we get those voices? But I want to be clear, are we asking that those voices, they're conducting the empathy interviews, or they're reaching out to folks that are in schools and connected to various communities? Is that right?
I think that's more what we're asking now. Daniel's going to jump on here too. I'll let him answer.
I think with my experience working with a lot of adjudicated teenagers and people out of drug treatment is, and also being a BSU advisor in an interim, is like students who often feel marginalized, or people in general, when they find a small community. If you want really openness, there has to be established trust. So I think like inviting people to a large virtual space to have a conversation has some problematic elements, I think. And so I think being really clear, like what's the pithy, concise message about what this is, why we're asking for it, and why someone may want to invest in offering their opinions, and then have an instrument that, I wasn't here for the questions part, but I'll catch up when it's available to me. But the instrument being really clear, and just an economy of words that speak to like the spirit and where it will go, so that people might lean in and then indeed network with people. So the conversations are more intimate and in smaller spaces. It seems pretty SEL and trauma informed to do it that way if you really want the voices of people who often aren't heard.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I totally agree. I think that's the challenge of like Beth and I held these sessions. We don't have relationships with folks, and so the trust isn't there, and I think your point about being very clear about what the why is and the intended spirit of it is like, I'm processing that.
I can't remember in the language in the House bill, is there anything that directs us to make sure that we are including members? And have we checked all those boxes?
Yeah, there's a long list of folks that we need to reach out to. And so maybe that's a part of the Google survey when we ask folks, like, who do you have, contacts with or connections with? We can just name them. And then, like I said, I think then we'll see where the gaps are, and then we can figure those out on this team and then broaderly at ODE as well.
Could we do it on just a Google Docs? Because the survey is going to go to just whoever owns it, right? And then we won't be able to know who's
yeah.
there at that time. So if we have it all in a Google Doc and everyone can just say like, oh, I have a connection here, here, that might just timeline wise go faster.
Annie, would you be willing to create that? Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. I have to get off.
Thank you for being here.
Todd and I will meet on Friday, it sounds like, to maybe compile some of this information.
Awesome.
Vanessa, I just put in the chat again the bill, because when you go down to look at the groups that the bill identifies, it's interesting because the way that it's worded, as if those groups are that we need their contributions and perspectives of those individuals. And so, but it talks about it in the sense of like the students' knowledge building and skill building. So it's just interesting. I'm looking at E and then A through, so little e and then A through, it looks like F, big F. And so as it lists, it relates it back to like the skills and knowledge of like the individual student. Does that make sense? It doesn't necessarily say you need to like make sure you address or like work with these populations to get their input. Whereas like other bills do call that out, like call out specific populations to address. So I just wanted to get your all eyes on it and double check.
So is it actually saying that it's actually saying, or if I'm understanding this, that the framework and standards have to address systematic barriers of all of these groups and why they would be systematic barriers, and also what amazing things they've done in history. So both of those things. So it's actually about what the standards have to include, not about the people, not about the voices we have to include.
I think so. And the reason why is because this was originally part of the, I think it was social science. There was a bill around including this language in social science, and they took that out and then created social emotional learning in lieu of social science courses. And so the language stayed where the subject area was taken out, because it should cross all subject areas. So I think like the way that it's worded is like, we would want to see like knowledge and skills. We want to see like textbooks, materials that are, like bringing awareness of like those interactions between the systemic and social structures. Systemic social structures and histories. Does that make sense? Like of where it was, and then like it got switched up.
those are all the people that we'd want to hear from though, at the same time. So
That sounds kind of tectonic. Like that sounds like I guess I didn't realize that, and I wish I'll get back and read it. I'm mobile right now and standing on a street corner, but it sounds like that's huge actually. It's really, and I support like that curriculum. I absolutely support that. But if you're talking about a set of social emotional learning standards that can easily be integrated into numerous academic kind of content areas and at some level meld with and yet transcend. Like there's a mission drift there. Did the legislature read the law they wrote? Like, sorry, it's just like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's huge. Daniel, I don't know if you can see us, but we're smiling of some form of acknowledgement to what you're saying.
I think it does that need to be addressed now, or does it have to be worked with? Like, how hard is it to really engage that? That's pretty key. Are we just going to work with it as is because there's a timeline?
Well, it's already the law, right?
It's the law. Yep.
Well, golly, I guess we better get to work then.
Yeah, so I think we can only do what we can in the capacity that we have with trying to get, as many groups as we can during this time. And I think there's opportunity for additional, feedback later. But I think like this initial input is like getting those values and what, communities hold close to them that we can elevate as part of this work to make some decisions about what that framework and the standards will look like. And we have a big, we've said we have this massive task in front of us, but I think Vanessa and I are saying like, we can only do what we can do. And we have this short amount of time that we were given by the legislature. So we can identify like who on here are they calling out, and then like try to see who all can, have touch points on those different groups, affinity groups. That just feels like realistic for what we can do at this point.
which then begs that other question about, do we ask how folks are identifying when meeting with them in the interviews? Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
And there's been, just so that there's transparency, there's some people that have said from ODE and talking internal that maybe we shouldn't ask that, but we were feeling like maybe we should, because then we can identify gaps of input or like trying to get enough, voice through the process, that we would know that, as we're doing it, rather than later, like, oh, we missed hearing from people that we needed to hear from. So we wanted to run it past you all and thought if that was important to you all, if that's something you value, to get that in the upfront.
Well, you don't know what you've gotten then, so you have no idea if you've attended to that standard of making sure those voices are heard. I think if you're doing a Google form, you just don't collect who the people are. It's anonymous, so they can choose whatever they want to put in there anyway. But most people, I think, will put in how they identify. So, the bill it's very explicit who should reflect. So we should probably put that in there.
So we're close to time here. It's 4:18 and we need to be thinking about next steps. So I know Todd and Rebecca are going to meet on Friday to and we can meet with you too, Todd, if it's helpful for Beth and I to be involved or not, whatever feels right for you.
Oh, I can put you guys. I just made a little quick Google thing. Angela offered to help out.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
yeah.
And then I guess in the meantime, we know we're gonna be meeting with on that following Tuesday. So we have that luxury of that time to see the feedback and be responsive. How are we feeling about the questions at this juncture, though? Are we feeling like, because we need to be able to share, this is our thinking, our current thinking. Do you all need more time to think about this? Do you want another day before Friday? Like, what feels best in terms of the questions? Because we want to be clear about that with the whole group.
Analysis paralysis for Frozen, the Frozen chosen. It's hard to, because there's a little bit of a moving target, but I think if we said we're going to have, say, Likert scale questions to start with, and then we want to have more anecdotal empathy interview questions, I think I would need a little bit of time just to read through them, thinking about how to roll those out. Maybe if we gave ourselves 24 hours to think about it, and by, say, I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday evening, we could commit to putting 2 more pennies into the pile to see how many pennies we can collect together. I'd be up for that. Well, homework.
I feel good about the questions you have for the empathy interviews. I think that I need more time for a Likert scale or a data quantitative.
Does anybody want to try the quantitative one?
Is your question, does anyone want to do it and send it out to everyone for feedback?
That's it, Annie.
Can you give me a timeline by?
Whatever you all think. Today's Tuesday, right? Yes, Tuesday.
Should we backwards map just real quick? So if we wanted to have the information available for framework group by April. So I'm trying to think of like the timeline for their group, because like whatever we're getting from engagement will inform them. We need to have it. So probably we would need time for analysis. So at least a week of analysis. 2 weeks to have them submit. So I'm thinking like the 2nd and 3rd week of March submit. So do you think like next week we could, Annie, do you think realistically by next week have it ready, like a version for people to review? And then
You can give me a weekend. Yes, I could do that.
okay. Sorry, I'm trying to like backwards map of like how long it would take.
So we're saying that we would want all of us to first look at them before they go out to the engagement group on Monday. Right? So does that feel okay? I'm hearing Annie says that she could use the weekend. Could we all commit to first thing on Monday looking at that initial draft? Awesome. Thank you,
When you say
Annie.
draft, is that the draft of the questions and also the framing?
How about this? Beth and I can work on the framing part of it and kind of like a protocol, so we have the same verbiage, and we can have that out also, I mean, probably by Friday. So if we have that looked at on Friday, and then by Monday, we all look at the questions and have our kind of last thoughts, because then Todd and Rebecca are going to share this with the whole group and just kind of create space for how is this landing. And our initial thinking is that we would all move into groups, like into our work groups, and just talk about it like, hey, what's coming up? So the framework group can like say, yeah, that's a great question. Or maybe if we tweak it this way, you know, they can provide their input. Same thing for the standards group.
And my understanding with the Likert scale is that we have to be more directed, right? Like we have to say, is social awareness something you value? Yes, no, right? Like, or we have to say, we have to use other language rather than these big, it's going to be skewed in that, it's going to be biased in that way, right? Like that's something we're just acknowledging.
You're directing them to choose on a scale, they agree or disagree. If you have a 5-point scale, you usually have a lot of folks choosing 3, which doesn't tell you anything unless you qualify what that is. A 4-point scale makes people have to choose. It's a forced scale. Strongly agreed to strongly disagree or whatever. So,
And Google doesn't have a, you can only define the edges. So if we're going to use Google,
correct.
we can't, we should just use 4. Okay, great.
You can also, you can do the choose all that. I'm sorry, that's not true. You can do the grid scale version of that. So you can still make one. I think that would get to that, but just in a grid, and they just make it, they only have one option to choose.
Will the item include a definition of social awareness so that we know that there's some collective understanding of that, or will that be left undone? And I missed that part, and I apologize.
I mean, potentially it could be bracketed with a question and like kind of given the definition when it asks the question. It could be done that way. We did discuss, Daniel, we discussed providing a definition of socio-emotional learning, or kind of like what does the language of the bill say kind of around that, as kind of like a grounding, but that wouldn't get to what you're asking, like specifically for that word. What does that word mean?
I think if people don't have an example, it's like a philosophy class where you don't define any terms. You don't really have any place to stand. You don't really know what, like people are just responding with widely ranging, like ranking the importance of literally different things in their minds. And then the data becomes worthless because someone's, social awareness could be like, yeah, like it could be someone who's a racist, sexist, homophobe who knows they shouldn't fart in fancy restaurants. Like it could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I think providing something so that people are in a common space, or maybe it's that balance of quantitative, that maybe there's a field for people. I don't know what it looks like. I'll look at it though.
I'm just making a note on the fancy restaurant. I wasn't aware, so I gotta make a note to self here. Thanks for the tip.
I never stopped teaching, man. Never.
Oh, it's fast and furious. Well, thanks. I think this is really hard work, and things that we could spend months, years even talking about, right? What does engagement mean? How do we ask the right question? Like people study this. So just appreciate that we're brainstorming and that we've got some ideas, and we'll just share those with the group and they'll have ideas. And then I think on Tuesday when we gather, we'll make some final decisions. And I think keeping to that timeline that Beth was talking about, we don't even have a full month to engage. So just kind of knowing that as well, right? Because we're going to need to collect the data and then look at the data. So Beth and I can look at some of those pieces, like the protocol, just timelines of things, and we'll share that out on Friday for you all to make comments. And then I don't know if it makes sense on Monday to meet beforehand as a group. We have that flex hour before the advisory group for those of you that are able to attend, but that's also intended for this purpose, that if teams need time or space to come together to be grounded or to talk through any final kind of items, that you have that space. So just know that that's available. All right. So 2 words, since it's 2 for Tuesday, to kind of wrap up our time. You get 2 words to share where you're at. Your head, your heart.
Feeling full.
My one word is intrigued.
Energetically befuddled.
I'm still thinking about our tutus that we wore today, so I'm just very happy about that.
I'd say I'm inspired.
Does that leave me? I'm excited. I'm excited for this work and the next steps.
Yeah, I would say curious and committed.
Yeah.
All right. It's 4:30, y'all. Thank you so much for your time, for your heart, and we'll see each other asynchronously between now and Monday. Beth and I will stay on if you've got time, but if not, we wish you a happy afternoon and see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I put in the chat, Vanessa and Beth, just a real quick, it's like a 8-second Google search, but there might be other surveys out there. One of the things in surveying is to find other surveys that have